This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and this is the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit that was incorporated in Ohio in August of 2012 and is currently awaiting approval for tax-exempt status from the IRS. Right and Left is a grassroots effort to promote civil discourse in politics. Our ultimate aim is to reduce the level of extreme partisanship that is crippling government at all levels. We think a good beginning is to influence the way voters relate to each other. 24-hour cable news, extremely biased talk radio, and social media have all contributed to a level of intolerance that Right and Left Incorporated is committed to combating on several fronts. Organizationally, we are patterned after Mothers Against Drunk Driving. As such, we will establish and fine-tune a chapter in Wadsworth, Ohio, and use it as a template for replication in other communities. Each chapter will have an active presence in its community with a speakers bureau, a local access TV program, visibility at local events, a local advertising budget, and a fundraising effort. Nationally, we will have an interactive website featuring a strong message promoting civil discourse and an endorsable belief statement, plus a regular newsletter and a capacity for the exchange and dissemination of ideas. We plan a multimedia advertising effort that will use the biggest part of our budget. Our discussion forum is aimed at demonstrating that reasonable people with opposite political views can have reasonable discussions about contentious topics. Today, our panel will discuss campaign finance reform. And today, our panel consists of Patty Haskins on my left. Patty is a retired math teacher and current Democratic member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh. Bryan is president of R&B Financial Consultants and a member of the Medina County Republican Executive Committee. On his left, in more ways than one, is Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. I would like to start our discussion today with Patty. Patty, do you think our current campaign finance laws need revising?
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, so much for that.
So that's my answer. You know, campaign finance reform has gone on since the 1800s. I think it took its biggest push starting in the 70s, in 1972, with the Federal Election Campaign Act, and then 2 years later, where it was decided that donators needed to, candidates needed to disclose the funds that they received. The Federal Election Commission was set, as well as setting limits upon donations of $1,000 for an individual and $5,000 for PACs, and that's your hard money that comes in. And that came about, I think, because of the Watergate scandal, a lot of those changes. There were attempts after that for additional campaign reform. In 1988, there was a bill that was going through, and it was filibustered by the Republicans, and of course then was never issued. The next actual campaign finance was the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, which is better known as the McCain-Feingold, in 2002. And what that addressed is that it prohibited unregulated contributions to candidates, and that is soft money candidates. It also then increased the level of individual contributions from 1,000 to 2,000, although I think that is now at 2,600, if I'm not mistaken, in an attempt to prevent organizations, groups, whatever, to have a profound impact upon a candidate and how they voted and their views. There is a great deal of concern with large donations going to candidates, particularly on the federal level, of corruption that could result because of those large undisclosed contributions. to the candidates. This, of course, took a turn with the recent ruling in 2010 with Citizens United. One of the big issues there, of course, was freedom of speech and whether that a corporation could donate. And what it basically did is it took away the soft money restrictions that were there and allowed corporations, unions, all sorts of different organizations to give large amounts of money, declaring that a corporation is a person, and by that reasoning, or an entity, is afforded First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. I think 80% of the population, and various studies have shown that 80% of our United States have decided that they really didn't like that ruling and were not in agreement with it. There have been efforts for constitutional amendments to change that. I don't know that none of those have gotten off the ground, unfortunately. I think my concern, and one of the concerns with this, is number one, you have corporations donating large sums of money. And in some cases, those monies actually can be coming from foreign sources, that they're not prohibited because they're going through that guise of the corporation.
Because they're mainly multinational corporations.
Exactly, they're multinational corporations, so that American politics and decisions can be made and determined by people that are not actually citizens of the United States. This is obviously, I think, of a concern. There's still issues that are going on as far as campaign finance reform, that it's not actually an attempt to reform, but to actually go backwards. Presently, there is a case before the Supreme Court, McCutcheon versus FEC, which wants to eliminate the aggregate donation, and this is actually hard money that is allowed. It's $123,000 right now, but it's by any individual. And another way, allowing campaign amounts to go up and up and up. I guess my overall concern is we're seeing these enormously large amounts of money being donated to candidates. We watched in the last presidential election, campaigns started a year and a half before the actual election. We were inundated with messages and robocalls and television ads because unlimited funds were available. We also saw the coming of the super PAC, super PACs, which allow people to make any kind of donation they want, and while they are not permitted to work with a candidate, they can't actually say vote for so-and-so, they can say vote against so-and-so. And while they cannot coordinate with the campaign, they know who that person they want to elect feels about issues. So they can go along with them. And the only person that really knows where the money comes from is that super PAC, and probably the candidate that's benefiting from it. And the people that don't know where the money is coming from in those ads is the person who's actually making a vote.
So you would be in favor of what? Eliminating corporate campaign contributions, or just reducing them?
I'd be willing to compromise on that. I don't know that, because we've discussed, how it's not just corporations, which you would assume would help Republicans, but we're also talking unions, which would help the Democratic side. It affects both of them. I think there does need to be...
And they all give to everyone.
Exactly. I think there does need to be some control over that. There needs to be some transparency in what those donations are. Perhaps, we need to maintain... This is why this McCutcheon bill is, before the Supreme Court, is so important, because there does need to we need to maintain limits on contributions.
It comes to mind too that just repealing Citizens United, saying corporations are not people, this could have unintended consequences. Your nonprofit organization, let's say Bill Gates wants to give $1 million to promote the Red Cross. He couldn't do it.
Right.
I don't know how prevalent that might be, but I can see how RightandLeft.org, a nonprofit organization, may wish to take out some ads promoting some campaign issue or another. We wouldn't be able to do that.
Brian, do you agree?
In part. I think there are parts of Patty's argument that are worth looking at. And the issue, having been a treasurer for about 16 years of various local and county campaigns, it costs money to get your message out there. And none of the campaigns that I've been involved with, in the state of Ohio and local levels, you're limited to the amount of dollars that can be contributed. You have to have full disclosure, names, addresses, all that kind of stuff. I'm all for that. I think when we get into Citizens United, we're dealing with a First Amendment issue. And just like you said, that if your nonprofit decided that they wanted to support an issue, you would be limited, if not basically barred from participating in the public square. So I really, when you look at corporations and people say, well, corporations aren't people, well, they're made up of people. And they have ideas, and they have interests, just as a union would, just as a nonprofit would. I pulled off some stuff from a website that I've used in the past. It's called opensecrets.org. And when you talk about campaign contributions, the top contributors, and I'll just list the first three. The University of California gave over $1 million to the Barack Obama campaign. Microsoft gave over $815,000, and Google gave $805,000 to the campaign for Barack Obama. Mitt Romney received over $1 million from Goldman Sachs. Bank of America gave over $1 million to him, and Morgan Stanley gave over $900,000. So this issue cuts both ways. And I think
agree.
we really, if we're going to look at this, we really need to say, okay, here's the hard limit. And if you're going to be an individual that goes out there and raises money, they have wealthy individuals that host these parties. We really don't have any. Have you been to any in Medina County? Any of those $500,000?
Not recently.
No, I haven't either. I haven't even been invited to the $5,000 ones. So it has to be. There has to be some sort of a limit, and I think disclosure is part of the answer.
It's part of the answer, and a philosophical thing too. I think it undermines faith in democracy. I think the average Joe figures, well, my vote doesn't matter because look at all this money that's going toward my opponent or by the person I support. Why should I worry about it? I think that's a problem with big spending in general. So I think the limitation is I think very necessary.
I've seen some proposals for ways to reform. I'm not sure any of them are perfect. One of the ones was like for state campaigns, and even for local, that you can only solicit campaign funds from the electorate that's voting for you. So that if you're in Ohio running for Congress or for Senate, you can't get money from California or Florida, or which kind of is interesting, but that's another way to limit it.
Well, here in the state of Ohio, judges are elected. And that in and of itself is an issue where they have a very strict finance reporting and campaign reporting. There's a lot of disclosure there. If you want to take a look and say use those particular types of reporting requirements that a judge, now that's to me a judge can, you want to make sure that they're unbiased and that the issues that are being brought before the court that they're sitting on, that they're ruling impartially and applying the law equally. That could be a good start as far as the types of disclosure, the types of contributions that they can receive, and be uniform.
I think what a lot of people are worked up about now with the Citizens United rule in 2010 is that it did use the First Amendment granting personhood to a corporation, which does have a precedent. The 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, was applied back in the 30s to corporations, and the Supreme Court did say that for the purpose of enforcing the law, the corporation is a person. And of course, people get worked up about that. But when I think about a corporation, it can be sued, it's taxed, it can be fined, it can be expected to behave like a person, the whole concept of corporate greed. Greed is a human. If a corporation is only a piece of paper and incapable of human emotion, how often I've heard over time somebody's company just doesn't care about them. Well, how can it? It's a piece of paper. But the other side is that the corporations have, since they are regulated and taxed, they have a duty to all the retirees out there that depend on the profits of the corporation to pay their pension. They have a duty to protect themselves. And I found out I always knew there were a lot of agencies in the federal government, but there are 18 agencies in the federal government that regulate corporations. And between them, in 2011, they wrote 81,247 pages of new regulations. It seems to me that a corporation has an obligation to stand in the public square and protect themselves. I can imagine that there are people in government that really are anti-capitalist. They don't like corporations. And if they were unrestricted, what kind of regulations would they be putting on?
It sounds like you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but that a corporation needs to be able to spend that money to influence a candidate to make sure that regulations go
their way. Or not against them, at least.
But that's where you get into undue influence, and because they have such large
Well,
funds.
it's influence, yeah.
It's influence, but that can go, I think I mentioned this to you before. I mean, a corporation also, though, can't vote, can't run for office.
No.
Well, you want influence, but let's stop short of bribery.
Yeah, exactly. That's my concern.
Well, it's one thing to be influencing who gets elected. It's another one to have lobbyists that are doing a lot of heavy-duty influencing after the fact. But the fact is, I think that any organization has a right to be represented, and if it takes campaign contributions to do that, I think when you look down the list of lobbyists, you say, well, that's a good one and that's a bad one. That one, I agree with that one, because that's my church there, that lobbyist. But I think that a corporation is incapable of human emotion, and therefore it's not a person, but we treat it like one.
Yeah,
Well, that's when you start talking about lobbying. I came prepared mainly for campaign finance.
Yeah. Well,
and lobbying is a little different to me, but every organization has interests, and I think we need to recognize that, whether you're Microsoft or you're the NEA. Both organizations employ lobbyists. I'm not sure how much Microsoft, I'm sure it's got to be in the millions, and I'm sure the NEA employs several.
Which NEA are you talking about?
Well, the National Education Association.
Oh, I was thinking of the Endowment for the Arts.
Yeah. No.
The NRA, I think, is one of the biggest lobbyists.
And the NRA, the NRA is a big lobbyist. And the government, AARP, there's another very large organization that lobbies and is involved, has been involved in elections, the AARP. I might not agree with some of their positions, but once again, does that group of people with similar interests have the ability and the right to the public square and to have their opinions heard? And I think that's where we get into the Citizens United issue, and that costs money.
Which of us, if we could wave a magic wand right now and reverse the Citizens United ruling in 2010, would you do it?
Yes.
Would you?
No.
I'd be very cautious about it. Again, for what I said before, it can have unintended consequences. I wouldn't reverse it exactly. I would put heavier limitations.
I agreed. Agreed with that. I'm interested in how anybody feels about the super PACs, because I think that really totally affects our elections. And
Yeah, that made it such an easy way to hide
exactly.
the contributions. Now, not just the quantity, although I think heavy spending is a very big issue here, but just the fact is there's no transparency.
That's the issue.
Yeah,
I don't
agreed.
have a problem with the super PAC if there's full disclosure
Agreed.
and there's transparency. If an individual wants to donate $25 million to a super PAC, have at it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Again, that's a First Amendment
that's,
issue.
He has a right, they have a right, she has a right.
Yeah.
But we need to have transparency within that.
Agreed.
Within that transaction.
I mean, I have to disclose everybody's name that donates
Exactly.
to my campaign,
Um,
and I've done
yeah.
that for each election cycle.
Yeah.
But-
I think that's really one of the things that I think we could agree on, is that if there's full disclosure, and if our organization wants to try to sway the opinion of the voters in Medina County, and we want to donate $1,500 to a robocall campaign, and we want to bother people at between 5 and 6 on a Tuesday afternoon.
Boy, people hate those.
They do.
Including myself.
Not money well spent, believe me.
But they are effective.
Well, let me ask this. When a super PAC can go ahead and run any kind of an ad they want, and when they're blatantly telling falsehoods,
Yeah.
is there a penalty?
No.
So you can go ahead and talk about Obama being born in Indonesia or something
boat.
all you want.
Look at the Swift Boat campaign.
Yeah, and the one about the Romney, that poor guy lost his job and
his wife.
his wife died.
Yeah.
Because he lost his insurance, but she was insured by her employer, so
Right.
it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
But they could.
Say those
There's
things.
no accountability with
Right.
what is said.
Now it seems to me that maybe there's a place that we can begin to clean things up.
I would agree.
You can go ahead and speak in the public forum, but by gosh, you got to be responsible for.
Yeah.
You're not entitled to your own facts. You can have your own opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the problem. When you have individuals, organizations that just, with a kernel of truth, just a sliver of truth, they weave a commercial out of it, and I think once again it's an accountability.
Do you think it would help to shorten the campaign? Like, what does England allow? 1 month of campaigning?
Do they really?
Yeah, it's 1 month, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
1 month before the election, so you're not allowed to do it. I mean, presently, right now, if you're a U.S. congressman, you go into office, and a month later, you have to start campaigning for the next
Pretty
issue,
much.
next
Yeah.
election.
We had this is an interesting thing you brought up, Patty, because here in Medina County and Wadsworth, we had a little gentleman's agreement that signs wouldn't go up
Oh, I know,
until
I know.
how many days before? Was it 30 or
60,
60
I think.
days before
Yeah.
the election. It was sometime after September. But all last year, in Medina County, there were signs for the individual that was running to replace our current treasurer.
Yes, and they lost the election.
And they lost the election. And to me, if we're sitting down and Patty's representing the Democrats of Medina County and I'm representing the Republicans, and we have an agreement, we stick to that agreement, And when you call them up and say, hey, there's a bunch of signs going up, there's something that they do about it instead of just going, oh, well, it's not in writing, or oh, well, we'll get it down, and the sign
That's my
never
super
comes
PAC
down.
doing it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think
I
that is
asked
super
about
PAC.
that. I didn't know where that. I
Yeah.
didn't know that there was an agreement. It was just kind of an accepted practice. It is. You can't. The person is legally allowed to do that.
Oh,
That
sure.
has been challenged.
Yeah. Oh,
It was
exactly.
brought to council's attention
Right.
that this was going on,
Right.
and there was nothing we could do about it because that person
Yeah.
was totally within their rights.
Exactly. No, you're right.
to do
They're
it.
you're within your rights. But if you have an agreement, if you're saying I hate robocalls, so let's agree that robocalls aren't going to go out till 30 days or 2 weeks before. Just like you're saying, they have rules in place where you run your campaign so everybody's not sick and tired of it.
I would agree.
We run with that even though it's not in the law.
Yeah.
When it comes to campaign finance reform, do we have the same kind of a problem that we have with reapportionment, in that the party that happens to have the most power at the moment can decide? It can take the initiative to reform or block initiatives. I'm impressed with McCain-Feingold in that they had a bipartisan
Right.
effort there, but
I had a note on one such effort that is bipartisan. Here's one. reducing candidates' dependence on big money, and there's legislation to attract and encourage small donations to campaigns. Was introduced in the 112th Congress by Senator Dick Durbin, Illinois, and Representative John Larson from Connecticut. And I don't know if those are Republicans or Democrats, but as both the Senate and the House reservation, it didn't go anywhere at that point. But there is some efforts out there to do that.
Yeah.
Durbin is Republican, is he not?
He's a
I think he's a
Democrat.
Democrat.
He's a Democrat, yeah.
He's a
Indiana,
Illinois.
Illinois.
big
Thank you.
time, big time Democrat, yes. Well, I want to thank you all. This has been an interesting discussion, and I want to thank the audience for joining us. And that if you want to learn more about Right and Left, please visit our temporary website, which is rightandleft.org. Or to become a volunteer or contribute to Right and Left, or to comment on today's discussion, please contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And I'd like to leave you with this quote from Albert Einstein. Law alone cannot secure freedom of expression. In order that everyone presents his views without penalty, there must be a spirit of tolerance in the entire population.